Today, we are going over an upgrade for the original Xbox and Halo 2 that, to me, absolutely transforms the way this game looks on a system from 2001. It is genuinely impressive, and I wanted to go over what is now being called Halo 2 HD. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure that like button and subscribe if you're new. Now, if you remember, not too long ago, I did an entire video where I did a hard mod on my original Xbox with Project Stellar, and I also did other upgrades with the hard drive itself, moving it to an SSD, the IDE cable, and I doubled the RAM from 64 megabytes to 128 megabytes. And when I did that, I thought, you know what, down the road, I'll check out some different homebrew, maybe patches or upgrades that are put out for different games, and that's actually what we're going to do today. Now, it's not all dependent on 128 megabytes of RAM, so if you're just running a standard original Xbox that's soft modded, there is actually a lot you can gain from this patch as well. But it essentially revolves around Halo 2, and, well, that's still like the most popular original Xbox game. People are still to this day playing online through things like Insignia because they just enjoy it that much. And I know, technically, there's the Master Chief Collection, and I'm not necessarily going to recommend you go out, get an Xbox, put a bunch of money into soft modding it, hard modding it, whatever, just for this specifically. But I think this kind of opens up the door to all kinds of fun, customized mods and patches that people have put out that maybe I'll eventually go over in a video, bringing them all together and checking them out. I mean, really, some of the homebrew is impressive stuff. For example, did you know that there is a Half-Life port that will use that 128 megabytes of RAM? This is actually one of the first things I loaded up when I did the upgrade, and it is impressive stuff. So yeah, I might be taking a look around, since this upgrade has been legitimately interesting to see what this Xbox can do now. But if you go over to the Halo 2 HD GitHub page, it's under Grim Doomer. They have a massive write-up, and in fact, they also have an entire website where they went over how exactly they did this, because there was a lot going on here. So, like, the bullet points, it has support for 480p, but proper 480p, which is a big thing, considering the way the game handled it was they did 640 by 480, and then it would essentially upscale or stretch the image, and you can obviously tell when you look at it side by side with some of their comparisons. I guess back then, we didn't really have much to compare it to. Trust me, Halo 2, when it came out, was incredibly impressive, just going through AV cables on a CRT at 480i. But when you got the component cables and it did stretch a bit, sure, the image, as you can tell in some of these comparisons, yeah, it was noticeable. But what's happened here is they've corrected this, with the 480p being now the correct aspect ratio and everything. And they also enabled 720p and technically 1080p through like 1080i, although I'll tell you now, it's not worth it all running at that resolution. That's pretty much just for screenshots. I'm going to show you some of the footage here. This is the 720p version of the patch. We'll go over some of the 480p stuff later on, but they've also had triple buffering support to increase FPS performance. It does utilize the extra RAM. So if you have upgraded to 128 megabytes, you actually need that doubling of the RAM in order to run the game in 720p natively. There's just not enough RAM otherwise. So yeah, if you're looking to do at least this version of it, you're going to have to start soldering down some extra RAM chips, or I guess have or purchase a service for someone to do that. You can also overclock the GPU, which you're seeing some of the stats on the top left, specifically for frame rate and then the frequency that the GPU is running at, which, yes, does work to increase frame rate just across the board, as you'd figure. But they've also worked to increase hard drive transfer speed for faster loading times, and it seems to just about completely eliminate pop-in. At least it was for me, as I am using an SSD and an upgraded 80-pin IDE cable. So it seems like a lot of the stuff you would see in Halo 2, where it would change scenes quickly, or different characters walk into frame and all of a sudden, like, their hat texture or something, or even their face would like kind of just pop in with detail. That's like gone just about. So that big upgrade there, actually. You can play around with the field of view. I did so at first, but it was a little weird, and I noticed that the reticule in the middle would be off from what your gun was pointing at, and that was just throwing me off completely. So I set it to 80, I think, and I kind of left it. I was between 75 and 80 at the end just because it was not as like severe moving things around and show, like, you can just see all of Chief's arm basically in the frame with how much the field of view will change here. And you can play around with the split screen divider if you are playing with someone else, whether it's horizontal or vertical. Now, getting this set up was a bit strange at first, but eventually I figured it out. So you're given two different files, one being the HD config. Essentially in there, it's an INI file. You go through and you set true, false, or just numbered values to basically tell it what you want the patch to do to the game when you start it up. In this case, I just went through and set true for 720p, played around with the transfer speed settings, the field of view. It was very, very quick once I read through it and figured out what was where. The only one that I had to play around with a bit was the GPU overclocking, because it turns out my GPU was not one of the best ones, because if I go above like 200, basically the default at 266 or so megahertz, it just starts crashing. I could get nowhere near 300 megahertz, which is a shame because it did seem to smooth out gameplay completely for some of the people who were showing it off online. But no, unfortunately not the case with the Xbox that I have here. But once I did all of that, I then used a Delta. So Delta is like a patching software that will patch the default XBE that's within the Halo 2 files for the ISO. So when you have that installed to your Xbox, you basically patch the one that you have, rename it, and then just replace the original that's in that folder. I did have to change custom dashboards because XBMC for Gamers doesn't seem to identify the full 128 megabytes correctly when starting up a game. So I went over to, I think, Unleash X, and from there, when I loaded up the game, it shot right up to 720p, no issues, and I was seeing Halo 2 completely differently. The game at 720p just looks way smoother all the way around, especially, as you would expect, on an HD TV or on a monitor where you can see a lot of the fine details around the characters. It's not as blurry, but the frame rate is definitely affected. There were many times where I would walk around through corridors and get 30 frames per second, which is the target for Halo 2. But when I'm outside and a lot of stuff was happening on screen or driving around a lot, it would dip into the teens. And again, I feel like if my GPU was one that would be able to handle, say, a 300 megahertz overclock, then I wouldn't be seeing this much of an issue, but it's there, and for a first-person shooter, it can get in the way at times. That said, I did just deal with it just because I wanted to see some of the bigger aspects of the game. As example, the Scarab, which is still an impressive thing to kind of behold in this game, considering when it came out back in 2004. The campaign is still awesome, and I still recommend people checking it out, even just on the Master Chief Collection. If you're not going to do all of this, it's still phenomenal. Oh, and the transfer speed upgrade is definitely noticeable, especially if you're running at like 480p, but internally on the Xbox you have, say, an SSD, or you do have an upgraded IDE cable. The load times are just quicker. Like when you see the Halo logo and the light going by it, it is pretty quick initially when you load in. And it's really cool to see that, especially between scenes, because there are times where it's just, it fades to black and then it fades right back up into the next mission. So that was pretty cool to see the original Xbox sort of chew through those loads times. You know, it's funny, I'm playing through the campaign to get like footage and experience it. And I realized that at one point in time, way back when, right? We're talking like 20 some odd years ago. One of the big things that they showed off early on, there's that level that we're apparently going to get in the Master Chief Collection at some point that they had initially showed off Halo 2. And one of the NPCs comes up and they drive you around. That was massive back then. There was just a point in the level, of course, that I'm going through with the Scarab where the AI stops and will drive you around while you're shooting the big gun at the different ghosts and wraiths. And I just stopped and thought, it's like, wow, it's so funny. It was that and dual wielding.
Head on, Major. Take cover. We'll leave.
Those are the things that got the crowd cheering back then. So now that I've talked about the 720p side with the upgraded RAM, you might be wondering, well, what does this do exactly for me if I don't have 128 megabytes of RAM and the board itself is mostly stock? Well, technically, you will just get a better overall image with the 480p that they've modified here to be just more correct. And with the overclocked GPU, you'll just get a steadier frame rate. In fact, when I drop back down to 480p, which you can do, I used FileZilla and I just went into the Xbox with the files, opened up that INI file, and just quickly with like a text editor changed true and false and that sort of thing. Took a few seconds really. And after that, I was off and running at the 480p setting with the overclocked GPU. And the game loaded even faster, by the way, going into some of these missions. And the frame rate was, I mean, near lock 30 pretty much all the time. And I'm on more of a mild overclock at that 266 megahertz. So if nothing else, especially if you're playing in like the split screen configuration, you should just have a smoother experience. And I really get a kick out of seeing these older systems. I mean, think about the original Xbox is almost 23 years old now, and it's able to do stuff like this running at 720p. Technically 1080p at like 7 or 8 frames per second. It can do it though. But be able to play Halo 2, which was an incredibly taxing game back then, still taxing now on the original Xbox, but be able to take advantage of more RAM being added to the system, be able to overclock the GPU, fix issues with the video that have been there this whole time. It's just impressive stuff from the community, and specifically Grim Doomer, who put a lot of effort into this one. So I will link to the GitHub down below for you to check out. It will require a soft modded Xbox. I will tell you though, it's gotten so much easier to do any of this soft modding compared to even just a few years ago, as more and more breakthroughs continue to happen in just sort of the process to open up the Xbox. I mean, all of it can be done without having to take a screw out of the system. And to my understanding, they're going to work on having this apply to version 1.5, as right now this is just for version 1.0 of Halo 2. The reason for 1.5 would be so that this can be applied to the Insignia version, and people can use this when they go online and have a smoother frame rate and probably opt for 480p. Although, who knows, maybe people want the clearer image, but 480p overclocked GPU will give you a pretty solid 30 frames per second all the way around in like single screen multiplayer. But really, really impressive stuff. And it was a lot of fun to go back and take a look at Halo 2 on the original Xbox and see what that hardware can still put out. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.